Let's welcome back Mr. J. Michael Hall, who's founder of Strong Fathers, Strong Families. And I've always said this, he's one of the foremost experts on the topic of fathering today. And we're very lucky to have him. So Mike is going to talk to us tonight about how we can harness our unique strengths, our different qualities as moms and dads to best raise strong, happy, healthy children. And as always, if you have questions, just drop them in the chat box. We'll answer them at the end. So, mom or dad, whose way is better? What do you say, Mike? I mean, this is such a controversial title. I'm excited to hear what you have to share about this.
Yeah, we kind of jumped out there, and so we're like, okay, let's just go for it. But there is a question about it, and so, yeah, this is something that we've talked about for a long time. This is a compare and contrast of strengths of moms and dads, and so looking forward to a time with you. But yeah, so when I tell people what I do, that I work with dads and kids in schools, and that I train people to work with dads, and that we have dads programs at schools and different places. So many people they say like, "Are you getting picketed or who?" I'm like, "No, why?" But because I've actually had people really call me some pretty bad stuff. One of them being a misogynist, which if you've met my wife and my mom and my grandmoms, you would know that there's no way they would ever allow that to happen. But because you're talking about the strengths of somebody, you evidently must be talking about the weaknesses of others. And that's not what's going on here. And that's what we want to talk about is there are strengths in both of us, and what are they and how do they work together? Because that's the whole point. We want to work together. And so, we want to talk for a second about why this is an issue. Because there was a time when people thought, well, if mom says this, then it must be right. Or if dad says this, there was a time that, we even had a show here in the US called Father Knows Best. Don't try that now. That wouldn't go over too well. But we know that there's always kind of been this conflict. I've been married 31 years. My oldest son is 28. And even yesterday, my sons are here for the weekend. Even yesterday, there was nothing major, but disagreement and conflict in our parenting because my wife sees it one way and I see it another. And it's just something that we've kind of learned basically from the lesson we're going to talk about today of how that works together. So this is really, I think the timing of this lesson works very well for the things that we've done, but this is kind of the start of where we start a lot of times. And it's also the heart of our work. So this discussion that we're having today is actually the book that needs to be written, but it's the one that resonates the most with people when I talk about this. So I'm hoping to bring some ahas, hoping to turn on some light bulbs today, but most of it is things you already know, but maybe didn't know how they fit together. And or from all the messages you get about parenting and just messages in general, I think we're getting in our culture. People don't always talk about this anymore. And we're afraid to talk about it because there are some what we would call traditional values in it, but the science backs it up and the research backs it up. And what we're really talking about, and the reason that we don't have a lot of conflict, let's say in the outside world for this, is that not only is it research based, but it's about what's good for kids. This is not moms are this, dads are this, who's better. It is what are the strengths that we bring, and most importantly, how is that important for kids? So please understand the work that we're doing at Strong Fathers, Strong Families is really about kids. It's not about hairy-legged men, but it is about what those men do for kids. And so let's talk about this. So one of the first questions that always comes up is, how are moms and dads different? So our first question is, what are the strengths of strong moms? And if we were in a room where we could all be in person, I would have you do an exercise and kind of, you've all done flip chart work somewhere in your business world and, in your training in college or wherever, where you put answers down on a flip chart. And we do this all the time in groups. And when I say, what are the strengths of moms? They're like, she is a nurturer. She's loving. She's caring. She's patient. She makes a way. She takes care of it. She's a taxi driver. She's a cook. She's a nurse. All these great things about what the strengths of moms are. And even if we had the same word for dads, it's different when we think about it for moms. But the ideas that are presented here, what we talk about the strengths of moms, when we get a list of all of those things, nurturing and nurses and taxi drivers and, organizers and advocates, all the great things that moms do, that is what we would call feminine parenting traits. And that one does get the eyebrows up, because you're not supposed to talk about feminine and masculine as if that's become a bad thing. And moms have feminine parenting traits because they're women. If you are a mom, you're a woman. There's just no other, that's what you do. Now, you may be a woman, but not a mom, but if you're a mom, you're female. That's how this works. My dad taught high school biology for 17 years, and I'm pretty certain that moms are the ones having babies. And because of that, there's things that moms do, not just as her nature as a woman, but in her relationship with children, because somebody always wants to bring to me the anomaly. Well, I know somebody that's like this, or I get it, but we are talking about typical, but we're also talking about natural, and we're also talking about relationship with kids. And so when we talk about what are the strengths of moms, we list all those things out. Those are feminine parenting traits. That is how most women parent. And it is not because of what they learned in some class. It's not what they learned from some kind of social pressure, even though that's definitely there. But I would think if we had moms from Singapore sit down with moms from the US, sit down with moms from Brazil, sit down with moms from Ghana or Kenya, and those are the places that I've been able to go through, what I find is moms are moms are moms. And even though there's different cultural challenges, opportunities, and barriers, moms are moms. And you don't change the heart of a mom, and nor do you change the heart of a father. Moms do what moms do across the globe in every culture the same way, down to this basic level, because of their relationship with the children and because they're women. And that is definitely a strength. And so how does that relationship work? Because we have to look at, why does mom do mom things? Why does mom do things the way she does it? And it is because she's a woman. It is because of this. So what we know is, in the life of a child, moms are the center of the universe. Children know that. Moms know that. Dads know better. Even if they don't believe it, they're not going to argue with it. We know in the life of a child, moms are the center of the universe. We know that when children are looking for certain things, they go to mom. And again, couples and parents that have kind of switched the roles we're going to talk about today, but they're still very evident and very typical in almost every relationship, particularly what kids need. And we'll address kind of some of those things as we go. So one of the questions I know that's probably already come up in chat, and I'm not even looking, is, what about single parents? Well, we're talking about, what parent are you? Are you the mom or the dad? So in the life of a child, moms are the center of the universe. Like I said, nobody doubts that. Everybody knows that. And hopefully men are smart enough to not argue with that, because that's not a safe position to have. But what's interesting is the child actually starts out in the middle of the center of the universe, right? If mom's the center of the universe, the baby's starting out right there in the middle of the center. And so through this period, what's interesting is, from the day that child is conceived, from the day that child goes from 1 cell to 2 cell to 2 million cells, that child will spend the rest of their life moving away from mom. Now, even though I'm all the way over 13 hours away or 20 hours away on a plane, I can hear the depression setting in right there in Singapore, because that's what the child spends the rest of their life moving away from mom. But we know how that works, because what happens at birth? They move out. We have drugs that'll start that process, but we really don't have good drugs that will stop that process. When that child's ready to come into the world, that child comes into the world. And so we know that mom has this disconnect when the baby goes to dad, when the baby goes to grandparents. You have some moms that at the end of whatever period it is, it may be short, it may be long, at the end of breastfeeding, when mom finally weans her child, there's a grief, because she's no longer sustaining the life of her child from her own body. And so now it's all of a sudden this relationship has changed, and she feels that disconnect, and there is grief. Now, some moms, because they've been getting up all the time, and some moms aren't grieving, they're throwing a party. They're like, look, dude, there's a bottle in the refrigerator. Dad, you can get up in the middle of the night. I'm done. So sometimes she's very excited about that. But we know that at birth, there's this first disconnect, right? And we're no longer in that. Think about your kids when they first went to kindergarten. There's a disconnect there. And so my wife is an elementary teacher, or was an elementary teacher. But as an elementary teacher, our kids went to the same school where she taught. I worked with that school on parent engagement. And at the first day of school every year, we had what we called the Tears and Cheers room. And it was for mainly moms. Dads were in there just looking for food, but moms were in there, and there was coffee, orange juice, and Kleenexes everywhere. And just mom, and again, dad's fumbling around wondering if there's donuts. But you could always tell the mom bringing her first child to kindergarten, she is a mess. She's a puddle. She's like, some other woman has my baby, right? She's like, what is going on? She sees that this child has moved further out into the world. And that's horrifying. That's terrifying to some moms, that now this child is out there with somebody else taking care of them, right? Now, you can always tell the mom bringing her first kid to kindergarten, she's sad, she's upset. You can tell the mom bringing her second kid to kindergarten, she's like, yeah, could you take the small one? Because the big one can do stuff. The small one, I've never even spoken to the small one, because the middle one has been talking to this child as my translator. And so, how am I going to entertain this baby? But you can also tell the mom bringing her last child to kindergarten, she's not crying. She doesn't need any coffee, because I'm going to get coffee by myself for the first time in 17 years. So she's happy to have all of those kids in kindergarten. We have after school programs here in the US, and we have moms that I'm pretty sure on the first day are asking about, how do I get my kids signed up for after school today? So, there's kind of that progression. But particularly with your first one, and sometimes with your second and third one, but most of the time we're like, oh, this is not as bad. But mom feels that disconnect at kindergarten. Now, I also talk about, my history as a middle school principal in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. What about when your child moves into middle school or high school, moves into secondary, begins to gain more independence? Now, I'll tell you a story about my oldest son. My oldest son, he was 4th grade. He wasn't quite in middle school yet. And I came home one day from work, and my wife said, you need to talk to Jake. And I'm like, what did he do? Is he in trouble? No, but you need to talk to him. I'm like, what did he do? She says, you just need to talk to him. And I'm like, what did he do? And his mother turns to me and goes, he's got a girlfriend. And part of me was like, cool, he's got a girlfriend. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do my fatherly duty. I'm going to go have the talk. And so I asked him, I said, so mom, how was school today? Fun. What'd you do today in school? Nothing. Same answer I got all the time. And so mom tells me, you have a girlfriend? Yeah. Who's your girlfriend? Felicia. Why is Felicia your girlfriend? Because she told me I was. So what happens is Jake's on the playground hanging out with his boys, and her friends come over and say, Felicia says you're her boyfriend. And he's like, okay. So that was the whole romance right there, right? But mom, see, for the whole time, what Jake used to tell his mother when he was smaller was, Mom, you'll always be my girlfriend, which is amazing. Mom loved it. And then all of a sudden, now there's another girl. And then there was a time where there were other girls, and we're like, we're not so sure about that. And then there was a time when he didn't have a girl, and we're like, hey, dude, you're kind of getting older. You might want to look into this. I would say, luckily, I would say, fortunately, I say we're blessed. April of last year, he married a fantastic young lady, and we're very glad to have our daughter in love. But mom was also ready to give him away to her. Matter of fact, I did the ceremony at the wedding, and I made sure that as the bride was given away, that we as the groom's parents gave him away as well. But mom feels that disconnect at middle school, at high school. If you haven't watched a child drive away to college or travel somewhere else to do that, that's that feeling of disconnect. And so moms just see children moving further and further away from them, even though they're the center of the universe. And so there's this whole piece. And so moms cannot or should not go with the child, right? But luckily, the child can always come back to mom. And that's part of her job as being part of the center, right? Like both of my sons are here this weekend at our house. And they come they come home at my house too, but it's not my house. They come home to see their mom. They come home because that's where they run to. If they want advice, they can call me from where they're at. They may come and we may have a serious talk, but they're looking to their mom. They come here for comfort. They come here for food. They come here for encouragement. They come here for validation. And mom is not out there in their job, and they're both out of the university, and she's not out there in all their other business, but she's always here for them to come home to. And that's how moms work. That's why mom does the mom things, because of the relationship that's set up. Because so many people want to talk about social norms and patriarchy and matriarchy. Moms are moms. And it's because of this relationship that is age old, that has always been this case, because mothers have children. They have this bond that's physical. They have this bond that's emotional. They have this bond that I believe is spiritual. And that's why moms do all the things she does as a mom, as a feminine parent. And it explains so many things when you begin to see the relationship. And when we looked at the fact of like, okay, so why do moms work like they work? And when moms are effective, what happens? And when moms are not effective, what happens? And what makes mom effective is when she is that center for those children to run home to. So if my sons, when they were particularly younger, fell down, mom would go over and pick them up, clean off the wound. They would just have a fit. They would cry. And she would pick them up. She would clean the wound. She'd put some kind of antibiotic on it. She'd put a Band-Aid on it. She'd give them a popsicle and a kiss, and everything's better. When they're out there with me, it was a little different, but they knew mom was there. Mom was going to take care of them a certain way. She still advocates for them in this world. She advocates for them to me as their father. And so she has this relationship with her sons when they were 0, when they were 1, when they were 21, and on their way to 31. That's what moms do. That's the strength of moms, is based on that relationship. So let's talk about dads. What are the strengths of strong fathers? And so when we get that list of what does dad do, the strength is, or now 20 years ago when I started this, the first thing that came up on a list was provider. He's a breadwinner. Regardless of what mom was doing. I mean, it wasn't like 20 years ago we didn't have women making good money in the workplace. But the very first thing when we said, what is the strength of father? Sometimes we would have groups, that's all they could come up with. It's what made our work, particularly at the start, so important. I think it's what makes this work so important right now, is there's so many other pieces to that now, if I was to ask you guys, not just because you've been here for these last 3 sessions, but it's because people are starting to get a better picture of what motherhood and fatherhood looks like. But the first answer we always got was provider. And I'm like, what else? But now we get play. And even that is like, well, all he does is play. Well, that's how dads teach, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So now we're getting answers like he's a provider, he's a disciplinarian, he's a role model, he shows work ethic, he shows patience, he definitely is the one that plays with the kids. He's the jungle gym. He's the one that does all the, he's the fixer. I was not big on helping with homework overall. I would, particularly with certain sons on certain things, because of their nature and my nature and their mom's nature. Some things she just didn't have the patience for. Some things I didn't have the patience for. But I was always the project guy. If there was a project to be built, dad was on the job. So I had glue and I had screw guns and I had whatever we needed. And I had many times to kind of dial it back to make sure it was their project that I was helping with instead of them helping with my project. But I did a lot of those things. Most dads do a lot of those things, but that's also masculine parenting. And so much right now of masculinity is getting a bad rap. We have what we call toxic masculinity. And there are definitely elements of masculinity that can be negative, but it's not the fault of masculinity. It's the fault of the people that are acting that way. Masculinity in and of itself is neither here nor there. It is what it is, and there are positive traits and there are negative traits based on what's happening. So what my message to dads right now is, there's nothing wrong with being a dad and there's nothing wrong with being a man. How you behave is how all that comes down. But I meet so many good men trying to do a good job. And I'll also tell you, as a man, it's not easy. It's not easy to be a mom. It's not easy to be a woman. It's not easy to be a dad. It's not easy to be a man. And so what it comes down to is, How are you behaving? How are you growing? So what are the strengths of a father? And that the strengths that dads bring in that play, in all those things, come from his relationship with his children as well. Now, we know that dads are not the center of the universe. Dads can only enter the life of the child from the outside. There's no other way to do it. Like, we don't give birth. We don't breastfeed. We're happy about both, right? But we come into the life of our child from the outside. The child comes from the mother. They are of the father, but they are from the mother. And and the kids know that. Kids know that at such an early age. And it's not like we're sitting around talking about it all the time. They just figure out. So when they start getting that cognitive level of, wait, I was in mama's tummy, so I came out of her body, but everybody says I look like this guy or I act like this guy. This guy's always around. So they begin to realize and put those pieces together at a very early age. And so dads can only enter the life of the child from the outside. I was at the birth of both my children, but I was outside of their mother, waiting for them to enter a world that I was already in. There is a great book by Kyle Pruitt, Dr. Kyle Pruitt. I think we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, called Father Need. And in that, he has a Native American proverb that says, mothers bring children into the world. Fathers take children to the mountain to show them the world they will inherit. There's a great scene in Lion King where he sets his son down and says, you see all this area. It's what we as dads do, but we do it from the outside. We don't have the same relationship that mom does. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't make one better, doesn't make one worse, but we have to understand how that goes. So mom has this gravitational pull, right? Like, be careful, don't watch out, and we call it kind of mom's aversion to risk. And dad's job is to work with it, but also against it. So what happens is dad says, or the kid says, I want to go ride my bike or my tricycle. Dad says, well, mom says, you can ride on the patio, put on your helmet, put on your bubble wrap, and you can go outside. Dad says, well, mom's here, so wear your helmet, but don't worry about the bubble wrap, and we're going to go out on the sidewalk. We're going to go down to the park. And mom's whole be careful. And that's what moms do. And that's a good thing. Thank goodness moms do that. Right. But dad does it a little differently. And so dad says, we're going to ride your tricycle and we're going to go down here. And then after we ride the tricycle for a while, we're going to get a bicycle and it's going to have training wheels on it. And so we're going to move over to this part. And then we're going to take the training wheels off. And we're going to have a bicycle that maybe you can ride down the street. You can ride to the park by yourself. You can ride your bike to school. You can do these different things, right? And then there's a time, and I had it with both my sons, and it's a really interesting time, to say the least, that all of a sudden you're teaching your child to drive, and they're driving away, right? So I remember the day that both my sons drove themselves to school for the very first day. It was terrifying. It was a moment of pride. And it was just that moment of, wow, things are about to change with this child. And then I remember the day that I went to college and left my parents behind in the driveway. I remember both my children driving themselves to college. I remember my son last year driving away with his new wife, right? Things are going to change. And so the bubble just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And you notice mom's in the center. She's always there for them. If they fall on the bicycle, dad's going to be there and say, you're fine, get up. But if they need it, they're going to run home to mom, and they're going to say, I fell on my bicycle. And so, what did dad say? He said, rub dirt on it. He said, I'm okay. And then you get the dirty look because your mom's like, he's not okay. Well, he might be. He's probably going to live. It's going to be okay. So what does that look like from there? So now you have this opportunity where the child continues to grow, and yes, they can go back to mom, but what is dad's job? And so even when that child launches, right? Dad is there. Now I want you to see something, because this was very much a part of my life, and very much something that informed this work over time. And honestly, it was during one of these talks, and a long time ago now, but it hit me. So my dad, who has since passed, was 46 when my granddad passed away. My granddad was 75. My dad was 46. I was 21. We're all 25 years apart. My son is 20. I was 25. So there's 100 years between my son, and my grandfather and great grandfather. But the 3 days after my grandfather died, my dad's sitting on the edge of the bed. My dad had a great heart. And he said, I don't know who I'm going to go to for advice. Now, when I was 18, my dad was an absolute idiot. My dad didn't know anything. But after going to college, after traveling the world, after finding the woman of my dreams and not understanding her, and I still don't, my dad started to look pretty smart. And so about the time I thought, this guy's pretty sharp, he tells me he doesn't know who he's going to for advice. I'm like, I thought you knew it all. He'd had several businesses. He'd had several mortgages. He'd raised 2 kids, 3 kids. And I say 2 because my younger brother was still at home. Kids that went to university, kids that were getting married, kids that go to church, kids that were staying out of jail. But then he said, I don't have, now that my dad's gone, I don't have anybody to go to for advice. And what I realized somewhere in the talk, not really at that time, I was 21, his dad was always between him and the rest of the world. Like no matter how old he was, his father was further down the line. His father had had more experiences. And so 8 years ago now, almost 8 years ago, my dad passed away. And the same thing just, because I had this experience, because I've talked about it so much, I realized I'm in the same boat. Now I have all his experience that I can remember, that I use every day. But my dad was always out there between me and the rest of the real world. And what I know is that when he passed, man, I inherited the whole thing. And so dad's role, whether it's at the tricycle level or the bicycle level or the car level or rocket ship, right? We had a rocket take off from Texas not too long ago, or built in Texas, take off from Florida. Dad's always on that outside. No matter where you go, there's always somebody between you and the real world. You got mom to run home to. And we talk about how mom protects us. Mom protects us by being there for us to go home to. Dad is the one that's out there with that experience. My wife works hard. My wife has her own career. My mom had her own career. My mom was a working woman most of my life, but she was always my mom. And so as much as I learned from her, the way that I do things, the way that I saw the world was based on what my dad did. So when kids come home, they want to know, Mom, how are you going to take care of me? And then Dad, what did you do today? So a lot of you are working moms and you're out there changing the world. You're doing amazing things. And you walk in the door from doing amazing things and your children are like, Mom, what's for dinner? Right? You could be the president. You could be the prime minister. And they're like, Mom, security guys, what's for dinner? Dads, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how menial your job is or how amazing your job is. When you walk in the door, how many times your kid go, Dad? And they say, what did you do today? And you're like, your mom did all kind of amazing things. Yeah, that's my mom. What did you do today? And what they want to know is, how did you navigate the world outside of this house? How do you navigate the world that I'm wanting to go out into? And that is our role, sometimes whether we like it or not. Sometimes whether we ever tell our child that's our role or not. We don't have to say, well, you need to follow my example. They're doing it whether you like it or not. And so children look to dads as, and again, I learned a million things from my mom and how she worked and ran her business and all kind of things. But what I wanted to know from my dad is, how do you navigate this? Even in my own marriage, even with my own sons. The good things that I do with my sons are because I remember the good things that my dad did. The bad things I do with my son sometimes is because of what my dad did. And then I have to remember, I don't want to repeat those things, right? But I had that example. And some of you didn't have that example as a father, and that's what you're looking for. And there's that disadvantage. And you know that if you don't have that person out in front of you, that, boy, your orbit is different. Your orbit's out of control sometimes because you're like, I'm not sure what this is supposed to look like at this point. Like when I ride my tricycle is different when I ride my bicycle. Now, what do I do with this? And even now, like I was telling them earlier, we just started another little business, and it just, all I could think about this week as we were working on that is I could see my dad doing it. I basically saw my dad when I looked in the mirror, right? But I could see that. And that's that example that we have. And so dad is always outside of that. Dad is always guiding that. And mom is amazing. We run home to mom, and mom gives us comfort. Mom gives us advocacy. She makes it work. So why, if this is the case, do we have conflict? Why did, when we put the title out for this workshop, whose way is better, all of a sudden we've got, over 200 people showing up going, yeah, whose way is better? The problem is, the reason we have conflict is we don't always understand how family works. So when I talk about where mom is and dad is, you can kind of see that, but that doesn't inform us on day to day. See, we think family works like this. And I know you have this in Singapore. We also have this in the United States, where, you know, you're driving down the road and you look on the back of the car and there's these stickers. There's dad, there's mom, there's a few kids. Now, we also, it got ahead of me there. We have blended families. So we have a lot of his kids, her kids, and our kids. And then this is a joke that I always tell, because I work in Salt Lake and I work with, you can't work in fatherhood and not work with a lot of Mormons. And I always talk about, this is a Mormon family. And I have good Catholic friends, good Mormon friends. And, you know, sometimes they have lots of stickers. But it's funny when you do go to Salt Lake, Utah, how many cars just have all these stickers across the side. And every once in a while somebody goes, that's not right. And I'm like, my Mormon friends know that they have a lot of kids. It's part of their plan. But you see mom and dad over here and all these kids over here, right? And you're like, so we're a team and then we've got all these kids over here. But that's not how it really works. We think, why aren't we on the same page? Because we're over here and then we had kids. But see, when you have kids, everything changes. Here's the amazing part. You can be married and you can be a parent, but you can't be married and a parent at the very same moment. When you're together as a couple, you're together. When you're parenting, you're together, but there's something different about that. And let me show you what that looks like. And so when we think about mom being the center of the universe, right? We know that mom's there and the kids can always go back to mom. Right? But she sees the kid as they're leaving, as they're going out into the world. And then dad sees the kid as them coming out into the world. Right? So where does that put the kid? Puts the kid in the middle. So when we're a couple, what do we normally do to improve our coupleness, to improve our couplehood? We get away from the children. Then what do we talk about? We talk about the children. But now we're ganging up on them as opposed to having them in the middle sometimes. But they're always there. And so my wife and I have been empty nesters for several years, but when we begin to talk about our children, they're in the middle because she has one perspective, I have another, and that child is always in the middle. And so, you know, how does that work? Well, it's kind of hard to, I have cattle here, but I don't have elephants, so I'm going to have to use a picture. So if I was to bring an elephant to Singapore, that would probably not be very expensive, right? But if I was to have an elephant in the room with us, if you will, you would look at this elephant and you say it has a long nose, it has big ears, and it smells like peanut butter. That's how you would describe this elephant. But when you have an elephant, it's usually chained on the back right leg, and this would be my view. And you would say, what is the elephant like? No ears, short tail, smells nothing like peanut butter back here. So who's right about the elephant? Right? It's in how you see it. It's two different perspectives of the same thing. So you are right about the elephant, but it's from your perspective. So when I ask this, I say, okay, so when we're the kids between us as moms and dads, who's right? Now, what's interesting is I train a lot of rooms full of women because we have so many female teachers. And it's so hard for all the women not to go, Mom. It's part of our culture. You see it on TV. Like in the last 10, 15 years, we finally got dads on TV that were not complete idiots. Every dad on a commercial is setting the house on fire, wrecking the car, doesn't know how to use his phone, or any of those things, right? And we're just now getting it back to commercials that are making dad not look like a complete idiot. If you were to treat mom, and I think probably this happened in the past some, but if you were to treat mom on commercials like you treat dads, there would be rioting in the streets. You can't say that about moms. Well, we say that about dads all the time. But dad's perspective is valid. Mom's perspective is valid, but they're different. So when you look at that, you're like, okay, so mom says, I think the kid can go here. I think they can go right over there, right? And dad says, no, I think we got to put a limit on it. They can go there, but, you know, and sometimes dad is pulling the child out. And then sometimes the child's saying, whoa, wait a minute. So as a father of boys, my wife would see them as competent, see them as capable. And I'm like, yeah, they're pretty good. Well, they can go do that. No, not yet. You don't think they can do it? Well, I think they could do it. But having been a boy at 12, I understand the heart of a 12-year-old, right? And as a boy, and I want to make sure that that's not going on, right? That there's that they're safe. Also, those of you that are dads of daughters have to take that input from the wife, who knows what it's like to be a 10-year-old girl or a 12-year-old girl or whatever else may be going on, right? And so we know that those perspectives matter, right? And so mom says, well, I think they can go, and dad says they can't get, but you get this kind of constant negotiation, right, to determine where the child should be. And the thing is, mom is right and dad is right. We're both right, but who's the most right at this time, right? And so we have to understand that we've got to negotiate what the perspectives are. So let's talk about how that works for discipline. So when we look at discipline, mom says one way, mom does another, or dad says another, right? And that's where we get in a lot of conflict. We talked about this before, you know, where dads, when we help our kids in education, how we change our vocabulary, how we change the way we talk, how we change the way we do things. And dads aren't harsher, but we get in trouble for that. And the same thing happens in discipline. Mom's disciplined for a different reason than dad discipline. So dad, some of you have known this. So mom says, I'm going out, I'm going to go do these things, watch the children. Now let's make this note. I think you know, but dads, we do not babysit our own children. Okay. That's not what we do. Dads do not babysit their own kids. We parent our own kids, but when we're at home with our kids parenting, mom comes home and dad's watching TV and kids are jumping off the back of the couch. And mom loses her mind. You don't jump off the couch. I told you not to jump off the couch. You don't jump. And dad's like, we're fine. I moved the table. We've been working on this flip for a week. What do you mean don't jump off the couch? They're doing really good. No, we don't jump on the couch. Well, why? Well, because that's the rules. Well, who made that rule? Well, mom did, right? Okay, but why does that rule come into play? Well, let me show you something. And I'm not sure. I know this is research. I've read the research. I'm not sure if it was in the UK, if it was in the US. But what I have found that almost everywhere I go, it's pretty solid, really around the world. What the research says is most households have 2,400 rules, 2,400 rules. So think about that. You're like, we don't have that many rules in my house. Yeah, you do, right? Because what are the rules? Well, this is where the kitchen is. This is where the chairs go. This is what we put on the table. This is where the forks go. This is where the knives go. This is where the spoons go. And so I bet in your household, there's a way to fold the towels. I bet in your household, there's something that we wash them with and the way we dry them, and we want them to be mountain fresh, and they fold this way because they fit in the cabinet this way. And mom is responsible for how many of these rules? 2,399 maybe rules. Dad gets one. My rule at home is, what'd your mama say? But mom in the household sets a lot of those rules. And it's, you know, it's not that she's the diva. It's not that she thinks she's a queen. Sometimes she is and sometimes she does. But the reason that she has these rules is she wants kids to be safe and she wants them to be comfortable. So if you're going to take a shower, on most good days, I want you to be able to pull out a towel and smell mountain fresh air and be all cuddled up and wrapped up and everybody's happy. I don't want you to jump off the couch because I want to have a nice couch. I don't want you to jump off the couch because I don't want you to break your head or something else. I don't want you to jump off the couch because I want us to have a peaceful home. Dad's like, just don't break everything, right? So dad has a different set of rules. And so mom says the forks go here, the knives go here, the spoons go here. And I had a lady one time in a training said, well, what about if dad's over that? I said, we would say, the kids would say, where do you want to put the forks? In a drawer. Which one? I don't know. Just put them in a drawer. Well, what if I need to find a fork? Look in the drawers. Dad has rules. They're just not as specific as mom has. And so that really translates to discipline. So these same kids that were jumping on the couch and it's like, don't jump on the couch and you don't do that. You bunch of heathens. You don't do that. And you settle down and you don't. And dad's like, relax. He's like, no, settle down. You don't jump on the couch. Well, the same family, and this is pre-COVID, right, goes down to the mall, goes down to the shopping center, and these same kids jump out and they run around and they terrorize the old people and they jump on the benches and they do all these things. Who's the first parent in public when your children are acting up to get on to the kids? Mom will say stop, but who's the one that almost always loses their mind? Pretty much dads. I mean, sometimes it's mom and dads are lax, but most of the time it's like, kiddo, no, come here. You don't jump on that. You don't settle down. and you know, what does mom say? It's like, yeah, I told you they were heathens. No, mom, what does mom? Leave them alone. They're fine. Those old people shouldn't be walking in the shopping center. If they didn't want them jumping on benches, they wouldn't make them out of concrete. No, dad's rules are different for a different reason, right? No, I don't want you to break things. No, I don't want you to get hurt, but my rules are a little broader, right? Just put them in a drawer. But when we get out in public, dad says, look, if you act like an idiot, if you don't behave yourself, you're not going to have friends. You're not going to stay in school. You're not going to stay out of jail. You're not going to get a job. And you've got my name attached to it, right? I'm not going to have it. So our rules are built from a dad's point of view. We discipline typically for our kids to be successful outside the home. It's not just a matter of pride and family name, but we know that if you act a certain way, then you're not going to get where I want you to get in life. And mom knows that too and enforces it, but mom's main role in discipline, her main goal in discipline, is for our children to be safe and comfortable. Dad's main goal in discipline is, I want you to be successful in life. I ask moms and dads, let's do it now. We can do it in chat. We're going to ask the moms first. If I said, as your child grows up, what do you want for them to be? Right now, moms, type in the chat, what do you want your child to be as an adult or as they grow up? Just one word. What do you want them to be? All right. Happy, good, happy, resilient, accomplished, healthy, loving. Okay. Now, real stop. Dads. All the dads on here, type in, what do you want your child to be? Successful. Himself, successful. Useful. I like useful. Successful. This is seriously amazing. This happens all the time, right? Moms want kids to be happy. Dads could care less if their kids are happy. I love my two sons. My sons are amazing. They have been amazing help around here over the last few days. I want them to be happy later. I want them to be successful. You'll get happy when you're successful. When you're successful, you'll move out and get off my payroll. And when you're off on and out and being successful, then I'm happy, right? And that's not even, I don't think selfish. I don't think it's selfish for moms to want their kids to be the happiest they can ever be. But that is the first impulse. That's the first thing we want to do. That's the first thing we want to see, right? And so our job as fathers is to launch our kids. And we talked about how dad's on the outside of that, right? And so our job is to launch our kids into being out there. We want them to be happy someday, but we also want them to be successful. And so that's where dad comes in to support that. And so again, when you look at this model, mom's on the inside. She is the source and the origin of these children. She is the center of their universe. Like I said, my sons are older. She's still the center of their universe. As my kids, as they grow and do things, they come to mom for advice, but they come to me for advice. And what they want to know from me is, how would you navigate this? Or how did you navigate this? And so there are times when they watch me, I'm like, man, I hope they don't replicate this. And there are times when I'm doing things and I'm like, I want my sons to see me do this. Not just because I may be proud of it, but I want them to know I learned that this is not a bad way to do things. And so as we look at that, I want you to think about, as a mom, what is your strength? And I want you to live in that strength. I want your kids to have that strength, right? And as dads, understand, and this has been the harder part in our culture, is dads have amazing strengths that are not in opposition to moms. They are in contrast to moms, but they're not in conflict. They're not in conflict when we understand that mom's perspective is right and valid, dad's perspective is right and valid, and that when we put both of those perspectives together and we constantly negotiate, we're always working through that, and we understand that it's negotiation, not win or lose, that when we get together as our parents in our strength, our kids get the very best of both of us, right? And so, yes, you need to love and respect the mom. Yes, you need to love and respect the husband, the father. But what happens is when mom brings her strength and dads bring their strength and we work on those together, our kids do so much better. And so that to me has been the biggest issue that has helped me as a parent. It's been the one that when we do this talk, you just see light bulbs coming on. I hope you're getting light bulbs today, because it's what's made the biggest difference in my parenting, but I've seen it make the difference in so many other people's parenting, because Nobody told them that you could both be right. Nobody told them that the way you think about it is fine. So a lot of moms get in trouble from dads because they feel like they're too soft, or they feel like they're concerned about the wrong things. Moms are concerned about what moms need to be concerned about, and dads are concerned about what dads need to be concerned about. And those strengths come together and make stronger kids. And so thank you guys for hanging out with us. We've got a few announcements here in a minute, but I just, I love what you did on chat. It made me look not so dumb. So I appreciate that. But Thomas, I want to lend that back to you. We are going to do, as you come in, Thomas, I'm going to talk about some of the things we're going to be doing in the days to come. And I would love to have this discussion further with you as we go.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thanks very much. So before we answer your questions, again, a big thank you to everyone who donated to FES. Everything is self-funded with FES, so we rely on the generosity of people like yourself to support these kinds of activities. So please, you can help by praying for us, spread the word, tell your friends about these talks. And if you haven't already, please consider giving a love offering to the cause. You can find this slide with the donation details on the FES website as well, and the Facebook page as well. So we thank you for your blessings. Let's get back to the questions.
Thomas, let me hit one that I just see here from you, because I realize that I'm always talking about sons, because that's what I have. Because the question that Francois asked is, do daughters still turn to their fathers for advice? Absolutely. Daughters turn to their fathers, sons do too, but daughters, like we talked about before, turn to their fathers for affirmation, but they also turn for advice. And many of you moms that have kids, particularly daughters that are teenagers, there's a time when, man, there's just so much conflict, because you were the queen of everything. And as kids, teenagers, both boys and girls do this, they begin to realize, wait, my parent's not a superhero. And so there's this whole kind of conflict around teen girls and their moms. And then they realize, and so they go to dad for advice. So he's the other for these girls, but daughters definitely go to their dads for advice. I talked about a young lady, Brooke Wooten, who's now married, Brooke Byram, but her dad, Roy, and I are very good friends. And she is so successful because she has a fantastic mom that loves her, but she has a dad that she always leans into. Right. And so daughters definitely do that. One other question I want to hit real quick is, will this negotiation not confuse the child? Confuses a kid all the time. Kids know at a very early age, I'm going to go ask mom for this, or I'm going to go ask dad for this. They know where they're going to get the answer they want. And they also know that they try to play us against each other. So two things. Number one, I think being open with that negotiation is okay, because they see that two adults are working to their better good. But the other thing is, a lot of that negotiation goes on when it's not around the kids. So I like a united front for most of the time, but it's united from whatever negotiation you had to go to. So my wife and I argued in front of the kids, but we did a lot of our serious arguing, sometimes fights, not in front of the kids, right? But when we negotiated something to a point, then we both brought that as united front to our kids. And our kids, even with the united front, would try to work one side against the other. It's what kids do to survive two parents. So I don't think it confuses a child, particularly as they begin to realize before we do that mom's on one side, dad's on the other, because they turn to one for one thing and they turn to one for the other. And that is not me coming up with that. That is us observing what we see as practical experience and what the research says as well.
Okay, I just want to bring up two earlier questions, and I think they sort of overlap and similar in some ways as well. The question is, how do you reach a middle ground, especially if both parents have very divergent approaches? So how do you agree on certain principles? And if one spouse, and if you can't reach a consensus and there's anger involved because of conflicts and disagreements and things like that, how do you manage that between a couple?
That is the age-old question, and the fact that what normally drives that is the fact that we think we've got two different viewpoints, and we feel like one's right and one's wrong, right? If I'm going to be right, then I've got to be 100% right. And if we can see them as perspectives as opposed to knowledge sometimes or decisions. But we need to validate both of those perspectives. And that's been a challenge for dads, because we get pretty frustrated when nobody in our culture is supporting us. I think, again, that has changed tremendously over the last 20 years. But even now around the house, I have to watch things because my sons don't listen to me the way I want them to sometimes because they're older. And sometimes the kids, like I said, will work mom against dad at all ages. But what we have to understand is, what are we working for? Are we working to be right? Or are we working to do what's best for our kids? So if we can understand, and this is the biggest piece that we talked about today, if we can understand that both perspectives are valid, right? There's nothing wrong with these perspectives. They are what they are. And it is from absolutely diametric perspectives. They're 180 from each other. So they should be different. And when they are, and again, when you come together and go, I can see my kid in that spot, man, those are great days. But there's so many times where as you work, you begin to see, I changed my view because I know where the argument's going to be with my wife. And I'm like, well, what can I give? What do I need to take? What am I very strongly opinionated about? What am I not strongly opinionated? You know what? Sometimes I lose. Sometimes I win. But more so is that I always validate that what she knows about our kids is what she knows about our kids and how she's doing that, right? It's her perspective and it's valid. And I want to make sure my perspective is seen as valid. And there's still conflict and there's still, when we get personal about it, but the biggest issue is to understand that one of you is not more right than the other. Both of you would be the most right if you work together. And again, I've been married 31 years. I've been a parent for 28. These are ongoing exercises and work. But the biggest issue is understanding that you're not right or more right than the other person. What you believe is exactly right to you because of your perspective, you see it that way. And I do think there's a time, if you can do it appropriately, to kind of stand your ground, mom or dad, and say, I just really strongly believe that this is important for what we want for our child, for what we want for them to do. And the thing is, if you can make that argument for the betterment of your child, most people will come around. If you're making the argument because you just want to be right, we're smart enough to see that most of the time. It's like, are you here for the kid or are you just here to be right? And I think that's where it gets personal, and that's where it becomes a personal challenge of what's my motivation for thinking this? Is it my perspective that I think is valid, or do I just want to be right? But if you can validate each perspective, I think you're going to be much more, number one, you'd be less angry. And number two, your kid's just going to do so much better because both of those perspectives work really well together if we can negotiate down to it. And sometimes you're not negotiating to the exact point. You're at least negotiating to, okay, I can agree to this if you can agree to that. There's nothing wrong with that. You do not have to be in 100% agreement about things. Sometimes it is more important to her than it is to me. So I'm like, yeah, I want to this point, but I can give a lot of leeway. And there's sometimes like, no, I think it needs to be this way, or I think we ought to handle it this way. Or even sometimes as a parent, I'm fighting personally, not from being personally motivated or selfish, but it's like, no, I just believe this so strongly. I think that's okay to have that discussion if we're not invalidating the other perspective and the other wishes of the parent.
Okay, we've got lots of great questions coming in, but I'm going to highlight Ricky's question, which is basically, whether you have any advice for co-parenting for divorced parents. And also, in a situation like this where a lot of times, the ex-spouse doesn't believe in co-parenting, whether, you know of any updated research which the family courts could actually use on co-parenting and, determining what's in the best interest of the children.
Well, and that's where I think this model has really helped us in our work, and it's helped people understand it, that there is not, if you put a parent as the sole person in charge, then you lose 100% of the other perspective. That child loses 100% of the support they would have from that other parent. What happened in the early 60s as we got into no-fault divorce was there was the idea, and I think part of it was just to support whatever the idea was, but the idea was as long as a child has one loving parent, they should be fine. The research does not bear that out. The research bears out exactly what this model explains is when a child has two parents from valid perspectives working for this child does so much better. It's not just, the reason we're talking about the value of a father in the life of a kid is because typically those are the ones that have been pushed to the edge, right? Those are the guys that have not been given some of the rights and things that happen in court. And again, I think we're seeing a big difference in that, even now, different than 5 years ago, much less 20 and 25 years ago, for sure. And so what we have to understand is, if we're looking at what's best for kids, and we've got to look at research, we've got to look at practical experiences. What we want to do is we want to not invalidate one parent or the other. Just like I said, when I start talking about the valid things that dads do, then all of a sudden I'm somehow invalidating what moms do. And that's not true. And the courts have to learn the same thing. Is if this child is going to be successful, and what we should be doing in courts is worried about the child, not worried about which parent is right. We need both parents working for the child. If not, we're doing it, right? All of a sudden, the culture is raising the child because we're deciding which parent is right. Now, there's a time when a parent is not being responsible, mom or dad, that there have to be some limitations. But what happens most of the time is we want to side with one parent or the other, and that should not be the case. We should, and we see a lot more, like in the States, we see a lot more states actually going to shared parenting agreements almost as a requirement. That not only can dad have some custody, dad must have custody and must be doing the work as well, but he also gets to do the work. And so what we have seen, even when we talk about this model, I have had women come to me and say, I'm going to let my ex spend more time with my kids, because they realize it's not about him or her, it's about the child. And those are great days for me when I know we've made that kind of difference for somebody, because what I know is it's making an impact for that kid. And so that's, if we can explain that to courts of what are we doing here? Are we trying to do what's best for kids, or are we just trying to be expedient? Because kids, there's nothing expedient about raising kids. And so what do two parents that, I don't care if they love each other or hate each other, do you love this child? And so you look at this model here, and you look at this model, and we have to understand this is where the kid is all the time. So if mom's pulling one way and dad's pulling another, then the stress is on the child. The stress is not on the parents. They're doing a little bit of pulling. The stress is on the child. So we do a 10-week class for dads, and we even talk to the dads about the fact that, yes, you don't get to decide what mom does, but if you're not tugging, then you're at least reducing that amount of stress on your child, because the child's always going to be in the middle. And so if we will focus in energy on the child instead of trying to pull them away from the other parent, our child does better. And that's what we've got to focus on.
Joseph has an observation that, sometimes we talk about the different roles between moms and dads, or men and women, and it's obvious enough to us, but how do you inoculate the kids, especially when you go off to college, you go off to university, and they're exposed to all this liberal, progressive philosophy where up is down and bad is good?
Yeah, and the biggest issue is to have that example, right? To show them, because if you're being a good dad, or you're being a good mom, if you're doing your job, if you're doing the best you can, then because I believe it's natural. I believe it's, like I said, I believe it's spiritual as well. That's my personal thing. But if you show that, then there's no argument with it. And as kids are being exposed to this or that, they've got to go back and look at, wait, that's not how my family did it. So I talked about my sons. My sons are great kids. I'm proud of them. But right now we have some different mindsets. That may go on for the rest of our life. But even as they move in whatever the direction is, I don't know if it's left or right or whatever, but as they have a different opinion than I do, even though that stresses me out a little bit as a dad, part of what I know is they will return to the solid values that we tried to teach them. Why? Because we tried to teach them over the 20 years they were in my house. Why do I know that? Because I varied from what my dad did. And guess what I'm doing? I'm living on the same farm. Number one, I look just like him. Number two, I see myself as him. And so part of that is you just got to keep showing up and doing your job. And yes, you instill those values, but more so you live those out. Now, if all you're doing is talking, it's not going to resonate with your kids. If you're just talking, then whoever has the loudest voice is the one that wins. But if you're showing, if you show how a man loves a woman, if you show how a woman loves a man, if you show how a family's supposed to work, if you show that when you do these things, you're providing value to them as a person, over time, they will begin to do that. The other thing is you've got to be in a relationship right now with your kids that when they go off and get these different opinions, that they still want to discuss that with you. And that is hard. It's hard for them because they don't want any conflict. It's hard for us as parents because we don't want any conflict. And it's the same thing. There are two different perspectives, even of our kids. As our kids turn to us as dads away from their mom, that's a different perspective, right? They have their own perspective as well. We've always got to continue that in the model. But more so is, instead of talking about it, showing it. We have talked in the past about dads, your important role as a, one of the first ones we did about dad as a man, dad as a worker, dad as a husband, dad as a father. They need to see you in all those roles because that's where real truth comes out. That's where they see you navigating that. And part of that role as a father, and really as a man, is to kind of lay those values out and live by them. And so, like I said, there are some things that I do that are so very natural now because it was the way that I was raised. And then as I began to put them in practice, and I was in conflict as a young person, as I began to put them in practice, they became part of me. And that's what our job is as moms and dads, is to live those values out. And so when kids see truth, they'll know it. But if it's just talk, it's going to be different. If you just keep showing kids that this is how things work, and I think part of our job is to be open enough to say, you know what, here's what the truth is. Here's how men should be. Here's how women should be. Here's how dad should be. Here's how mom should be. Here's how husband should be, wives should be. When we're not that way, that we admit to that, right? That we're like, hey, I just did something as a dad, as a man, as a husband that I probably shouldn't do. And I want you to know that that was my mistake. And that's not how I see the way we ought to act as a man, as a husband, as a father, whatever. And so we have to apologize and we have to face up to that. And I think that helps kids see the value too of, wait, I was taught this and my dad showed me there was conflict, right? Like, it's not always easy to do, because that's also a challenge for our kids, is they're like, dad always told me this, or mom always told me this. Man, this is hard. How did they do it? Well, because it's true. It's what you follow through and what you do. And our kids will learn from that over time.
Mike, what about when the roles of parents are swapped? We know that mom is the center of the universe for the child, but what if dad was the one who was at home, primarily? Does it affect the dynamic as a couple and as parents?
It can, but it's really down to the parents. And I talked about the book by Kyle Pruitt, which is Father Need. And that the origin of that book was, as there was a growing group of stay-at-home fathers, he had that same question, was, how do things change? And it's really informed our work in the fact that even if dad has a different role, like it may be more domestic or maybe less of a breadwinner or maybe whatever, mom may be working more, maybe working less. So you do have anomalies where people even switch their parenting role, where mom is more of the disciplinarian, dad is more of the nurturer. There's nothing wrong with that because those two perspectives are fine. It's just what we're talking about is what's more typical, what most people identify with. But what he found in his book, in his study, was that regardless of who was washing clothes and cleaning house and giving childcare, if you will, regardless of that, kids still saw their parents in these roles. And that's what was important to me, was it wasn't about what we have set up in a domestic fashion, but it was like, my mom may be, again, the prime minister. She may be the president, but that's my mom. And I see her this way because I came from her. And this guy may be the one that's home all the time. This guy may be the one that's doing what, unfortunately, some people think is a menial thing, which is very important work for mom or dad to do it. But the kids see dad does things differently. Dads will play with kids more than moms will, regardless of what your role is, right? And so I think if you're the stay-at-home dad, I think that's fine. If you're the stay-at-home mom, I think that's fine. If you're both working parents, I think that's fine. Because what's going to happen is kids see you the way they see you. And what you want to do is you want to take whatever your outside role is and make sure it doesn't conflict, which is going to at one time or another, but doesn't conflict with what your role as a parent is. And kids see us that way regardless of what our jobs are. Like I meet a lot of stay-at-home dads and they still act like dads and their kids still treat them like dads because it's the nature of our relationship. It's really why we explain it that way, because we want to take the stay-at-home issue or the mom being the breadwinner issue or whatever those issues are, and we want to say that determines everything. No, our relationship with our child determines that. And most of the time, well, all the time, they come from mom. All the time, dad's from the outside. Regardless of what they're doing in those places, that's their perspective for their kids.
Okay, Kevin wants to know, how do we present a united front when mom and dad disagree on rules or they disagree on what's important for the child?
I think as long as we're not just losing our minds in conflict, I think sometimes it's okay to have that discussion. Our kids already know it. I've watched 2-year-olds. I've watched less than, kids younger than 2 years. They know who to go to for certain things. It's interesting to me that we don't tell our children, hey, if you fall down and hurt yourself, run to mom. If you hurt yourself and you think you can be okay and you look to dad and dad says you're okay, then you feel okay. It's kids already know that. And so they know that there's two different perspectives, and they will begin to work it at a very early age. But so I think also that's part of kind of providing those values is, as I started doing this work, I realized how different my mom and dad were. And why were they? Well, it began to open up this information and begin to open up these ideas that we talked about today. Kids are going to know that. Kids know where they go to for certain things. And so I think that's fine. What we want to do is we want to have all this peace, right? We're like, well, we just got to have a united front. And just like on the stickers, mom and I are together. And we're parenting from, the kids see us from two different perspectives. And we need to give value to that. We need to not think that we got to be some kind of sitcom family where everything goes in a certain direction. This is life. It's not easy. And there is conflict. But what we're showing in our conflict, and again, hopefully it's not over the top conflict, but what we're showing in the conflict is this is work. Life takes work, and we're working for the betterment of our kids. So what our kids learn, even as they saw how mom was or dad was, they see who has their best interest at heart. And so when a mom is being a mom, a dad is being a dad, even when there's conflict, the kid knows that they're kind of fighting for them, if we are in fact fighting for them as opposed to just fighting about them. It's the same thing when you talk about non-custodial parents or one parent, whether it be the mom or the dad, that is more interested in being a friend, more interested in being popular with the child, if you will, more interested in having the child like them as opposed to parenting. I can't tell you how many adults I talked to that were so disappointed in their parents over the long run because they realized that all the parent wanted to do was just be liked and not be the parent. And all of us have had that moment somewhere along the lines where we just wish our parent had done something like this, right? We've all made mistakes, and so our kids are going to see the same from us. But what our kids want us to be is parents. And so they'll understand, again, this is not just you're not trying to raise a great 4-year-old. You're trying to raise a great adult. And sometimes, and the Bible says, raise up a child in the way that they shall go, and when they were old, they will not depart from it. Well, what is old? We think 18. Well, they don't have it all when they're 18. I'm 53 years old. I guaranteed if my dad was still here, he's got some room to grow. And so we know that whatever that is they're going to come along and see that value. And what they're going to see is that you went to battle for them, hopefully again in a positive way, but it was about them, not about being right, not about being a bossy parent, not about just not liking the other parent. It was about everything that we do in this discussion, in this negotiation, is what's best for you. And there's a time when they need to hear you discuss. I really think this is important for teenagers, that when you as two parents, again, if you can do it positively, or at least, not negatively, that you're like, well, he wants to go to a party, or she wants to go over a friend's house, or she wants to go out with this boy. Let's talk about some negotiation, right? Mom says, I think it's fine. And dad says, no, it's not fine, because I was a boy. And I know how boys think, and she's not ever going near a boy. It's like, yeah, but you were the boy for me, and we wouldn't be together if it wasn't for, yeah, I get it. So there's that negotiation. So the kids need to listen to us kind of talk through it sometimes. Why do we not want him to go to this house? Or why do we not want them to go to this party? Not because I don't think you're responsible, or maybe I do. Maybe I think the last time you weren't as responsible as I wish, so we're gonna let you grow a little bit. Or I think the world of you, I think you're fine, but you're not ready to make these kind of decisions. You don't have the maturity it takes to make the decisions that get presented to you in this place. So some of that discussion is very important for kids to hear. We talked before on discipline, how you don't negotiate with a 2-year-old. You don't reason with a 2-year-old. But along the way, there is a time to say, the reason I don't want you to ride your bike to the park by yourself is I just want you to be able to handle your own self around people that may be dangerous, or situations that may be dangerous, like traffic or whatever may be the case. Right. And so kids need to know why we're deciding that. And there's times when mom and dad can be in conflict, if you will, that it's good for the kids to hear that. The challenge is just, again, validate each other's perspective. And that makes it so much easier to work out, even in front of the kids.
Mike, do you have any advice for, say, a family in spiritual matters? If dad isn't interested in the children's formation, or he gives the wrong signals, or he gives the wrong examples, and the child loses the faith, what do you have to say to a family like that? And if you have any advice on how you can foster faith at home?
Yeah, and and I was lucky to have a faithful mom and dad. Raised me as church going, maybe too much because sometimes I feel like I'm up to my neck in our church work and things like that. But I was very blessed to have parents that believed in that. But I will tell you that both my parents had very different approaches to that, and I learned from both of those. My wife and I have a mutual faith, and for the most part have a mutual direction that we go in, but she sees things, it's a female male thing. And again, mom, we know, right, the value of a mom and how she portrays faith to the kids, being the ones that they come home to, right, being the one that provides that nurture. She is a fantastic, let's go with this idea, she's a fantastic example of how God loves us and how God gives us grace and really mercy, right? And what we talked about before when we talked about how dads raise kids differently and they kind of have this, they're better with separation anxiety, is mom loves me, but dad saying, not everybody loves you like mom does, but I love you, but also I have certain standards for you, right? And so sometimes there is an absolute lack of interest on the dad's part where that happens. Now, I'm going to tell you about this research, and I'm going to give you a caveat because I've had it presented to me 2 or 3 times, but I've asked for the source because I believe if I'm going to talk about research that I want to know the exact source, because there's so much misinformation out there. You know this, even pre-Facebook social media. I always wanted to make sure that it was valid information. But the information I was given was that when a teenager is converted, let's say into Christianity, was where the study was done, that when a teenager is converted into Christianity, 15% of those kids convert their family, like as a unit. 32% of women who are converted into Christianity or that are faithful within their religion convert their entire family to that religion. But what they found was, and again, I've been looking for years for this because I get it, it keeps coming back to me. And I want to believe it, and I can see the value of it, but I always want to validate it. But 92% of men that convert to Christianity, as the study said, take their whole family with them. In the book of Acts, it talks about the whole family came along. And dads, this is something you have to understand. We've talked about the value of education. We've talked about the value of work. We've talked about what dads do when they read. We talked about what dads do when they discipline. I cannot tell you a more important piece of whatever your faith may be, for that to be passed on to your kids, it's got to come from the dad. Lots of children have taken mom's faith and learned and grown from it. We all know that. But just like we talked about today, what kids learn from us is, Dad, how do you navigate the world outside? You can see moms go through amazing challenges. You can see moms have this tremendous faith, and their faith builds and develops everything they have in them, right? But there's a way that children kind of invalidate that for mom, because she's my mom, right? And it's not fair to moms, but it is what the case is. Just like dads are seen as, raging lunatics sometimes, because we are, moms are seen sometimes, particularly within their faith, oh, she's just this, she's naive, or she's this, or she's that. It's not fair and it's not right, but it's how kids sometimes see us. But because they're looking to dads, like, how do you navigate the world outside of this home? How do you make it through this world? Well, kids that see a dad with no faith say, well, that's one way, if not the way, to navigate the world. Kids that see a dad in faith, whether it's right now as they've grown into it, or they're like not sure and they're waiting to grow, when conflict hits, when challenges come about, they're going to say, how do I navigate this challenge? How did my mom do it? How did my dad do it? And we can learn from both. Both are valid. But dads have so much, if you will, weight, responsibility of showing how to effectively and positively, I hope, navigate the world outside of their home, that when faith is a part of that, that becomes a part of what kids do, right? My sons and I don't have the same faith walk right now, if ever, because we're at different stages. But I know that when conflict hits, one of the questions they'll ask is, okay, so in this situation, what would my dad have done? What would my mom have done? What would my mentor have done, right? They're all going to look at those examples. Dads, you're going to be an example of one or the other. You don't get out of this. You're going to be present in that example. If you show no faith and no practice of faith, that's going to be a strong example to your kids. If you follow through on your faith and you have a vibrant life within your faith, whatever that may be, your kids are going to learn from that. And so we have that responsibility, and we don't get to abdicate it. No matter how strong mom is in her faith. My wife is an amazing woman, an amazing, sweet, faithful woman, but I've got to show my part in how I navigate faith, because our kids are getting both of those perspectives as they do that.
Okay, we're coming up on time, so and we've got lots of very exciting announcements to share with you as well. So don't go anywhere, okay? But before we do that, Mike, someone asked, you made a reference to a book that you were talking about. It was by Carl. Yeah, what was the title and the author again?
Fatherhood, Fatherneed. It's all one word. A ton of the research we've talked about in these talks is involved there. There is a growing body of research on fatherhood, but a lot of what we use was from the limiting, it's just not been studied except in the last 15 to 20 years. So Fatherneed, Fatherneed by Kyle Pruitt, Pruett. It's a great book. I've got some other suggestions if you want them. And we've always talked about, we need to get this written into a book, but it's so much easier to talk about than write it down. So,
awesome.
but yeah, so, I mean, and again, we use all this good information to inform our work, personally and with dads as well.
It's great. Terrific. Okay, now, before we end, just a couple of quick things to share with everyone. First off, okay, we're just pulling up the slides and everything. Just give me a second. Okay, first off, the next topic for Dads Matter is going to smell like Teen Spirit. So basically, when you get to Nirvana.
That's pretty rock and roll.
Yeah.
Pretty rock and roll.
So so we're going to focus on parenting teenagers, and this is obviously one of the biggest challenges for parents the world over. So don't miss it. We hope you'll be able to join us then as well. And this is a very important thing. As always, typically we don't get a chance to answer all the questions that we get, and they're all great questions. So we're also working on organizing a coaching sessions with Mike for smaller groups for dads who want to improve their fathering skills. So, if you want to level up with some practical tips, if there are questions that you need answers to, that you want to dive into, that's something to look forward to. So, and the fact is, because everyone's struggle and experience is different, it's also an opportunity for us to listen and to learn from you as well. So Mike, I know it's kind of late, but do you want to say a few words about that quickly?
Yeah. So I love that we've had this group on here. We've had big crowds, if you will, and I love all the questions. But I just know that, number one, hopefully you've gained something from our experience, but I'm a guy that works face to face with lots of people. That's very hard to do right now. So we want to kind of limit it to 20, 25 people. If we have way more people than that want to do it, we'll set up more sessions. It's as simple as clicking on a few things. Our original plan was for me to come to Singapore. And this may give us more opportunities to have more discussions about this. And so, because you've got very specific questions, and some of them I have specific answers for, but a lot of it, I would rather us talk about it. I would rather us work through it. And what I find is there's going to be a lot of different questions come into a group of 20 to 25 dads, but it's probably, your question is probably the same one that somebody else has. What I find in working with 250,000 dads now in the last 20 years is we've all got some of the same basic experiences, challenges, and questions. And so there's also some value in that, because in that group, you'll also see, wait, these guys are same boat. Like, we as men don't go around with our heart on our sleeve, and we don't talk about a lot of our struggles sometimes. But this will be a safe place to do that. But it's also just to ask questions and just say, this is what do I do with this? Or how do I work with this? And I won't have all the answers, but what will happen is, in this group of 20 to 25 guys, one of these guys may have the answer as well. That's why, we talk about it, Ask Mike Anything, but it's going to be us as a group working through that. And so we'd love to get, and again, if we have more than 20, 25 guys, we'll set up another session, or we'll set up a different group where we're able to do that. But we'd love to give you the opportunity to just have more of a talk, more of a, guys really hate the word intimate, more of an intimate setting, but a time where we can get together as guys and be safe to talk about the things we need to talk about. And again, I don't think it gets that serious, but it's the same thing that we're all working on.
Yeah, so dads, I mean, if, I would really encourage you to sign up for this, because, one of the things is, you just don't have enough, support groups like this where you can really get into and share your experiences, and also pick up some, really healthy tips as well about how to go forward. So, so don't worry if you can't remember all the details about this. We'll send you an email with updates after tonight. And with that, really, I know it's kind of late. So with that, I want to thank Mike for another fantastic, insightful session. And I want to thank everyone for making the time to join us tonight as well. On behalf of Mike and FES, thank you very much once again, and have a good night.